All right, the next concept we need to address is compression, rotation, extension, or extension, rotation, however you categorize it, doesn't really matter. The idea is that there are three forces that we can be using to apply both during a submission. That's how we really want to address it here, but we're going to give you very specific examples of all three of those things. And more importantly, as relates to this concept, is rather than using them as separate forces, when we're trying to be as efficient as we can with a submission, we want to combine these forces. So we'll give you an example positionally of what these forces are. So I'll get you on your back for a second. So we're going to use the knee ride as an example. And I'm just going to move to this side here for a second. So extension would be, this would be like a back extension, right? Compression would be me crunching, and then rotation is a twisting force. So using the knee ride as an example, if I wanted to use rotation, for instance, if I pin your biceps here and I use my right foot to access your knee, I'm twisting your spine. So I'm using the knee ride in this case to create rotation, which breaks your posture, creates some vulnerability. If I wanted to use extension, I could, let's say, if I got crossface and rather than trying to twist your head, I drive my shoulder underneath your jaw and I use my shin as a counterpoint against your legs and I start driving this way. That's extension, right? I'm extending your spine. And then we've got compression, and this one's usually more like done in the gi, but you could use this in no-gi by grabbing the back of the head, but you'll see people do this sort of thing where I'm pulling up on you and driving my knee into you. So there's rotation, extension, and compression as they relate to positions. All submissions tend to fall into one of those categories. So again, we're going to give you specific examples of rotation, extension, and compression, and one submission that uses just one of those elements. And then we're going to go through those same submissions and show you how we can apply all three of those elements at the same time to maximize your effectiveness with the submission. Okay, we're going to start with an example of a rotation-based submission, which is the Kimura. This is the most common one. So if I grab, your bottom arm, forearm, let's call it, and I wrap it up, I'm controlling the end of the lever, so my hand, again, we're not going to get too in depth, but my hand will be gripping and attempting to start to rotate your wrist this way, which is going to start to expose your elbow a little bit more. And when I hook up the grip here, I'm attempting to get you either on your side or I'm attempting to pin you in place. In either way, case, when all I'm doing is applying rotation, the amount of movement, even if I'm pinning your torso here, there's a fair bit of movement here and you're still not tapping. So that's just applying the most basic element of the Kimura, which is rotation.
Which has definitely tapped out a lot of people.
100%. So again, we're not arguing at any point here that this is the wrong way to do it. This is a very effective way to do it, but we can be more effective. So if I let's use this one. So if I get you on your side, and I get the same thing. I use a thumb grip usually initially to separate the arm from the body, and I apply a bit of rotation here, and then I switch my thumb out, grabbing my wrist. My biceps is staying behind your triceps, so I'm creating a bit of wedging pressure. My elbow here is blocking your shoulder, and I'm trying to push this down behind you. So I've achieved already the rotation. All right? Now, I can be doing a few different things with my foot here. I prefer to step into the armpit, or the shin will cover the biceps. If the shin covers the biceps, my other foot will go into base. So I'll just go here like so. So here's just rotation. That took a fair bit of movement. I'm going to start to apply extension as well. So I'm applying that end of the lever action here, which is starting to do that rotation. I'm now going to connect my chest to the back of your triceps. We're going to talk a little bit later about force production, but I'll be using my legs to generate force here. I'll be attempting to compress your arm as much as possible. So I'm not just rotating here like so, but I'm starting to bend your arm in and I'm tugging it tight against my chest. I'm also trying to pull your arm up like this. We're going to be talking about tension and removing slack in a later video, but the idea is I don't want your shoulder to have a bunch of range of motion to absorb any force I'm generating. So now I'm going to be compressing somewhat, extension, and now when I start to add that rotation, I'd say about a quarter of the movement is necessary to achieve the same result.
How would you apply it if you were inside down on the other arm?
Right, so if I got here like this, the same motion that I was doing before, which is pulling the arm away from the body and compressing it in like this. And then, there we go. I was trying to get my elbow to the mat to aid it, but you can see just by adding those two things. So extension, compression here, very little movement necessary to achieve the same goal. Some applications of these different submissions, what you will notice is that it's easier under certain versions of them to apply extension, rotation, and compression, whereas some of the versions you see, you're only applying one of them, or sometimes two or whatever. And that's, again, if we go back to kind of the previous video where we talked about the straight ankle lock versus the stomp 411 and how the disparity in alignment determines how high percentage something is. So if we want to be like really pedantic about this, we're talking about high percentage submissions. We're not just talking about the Kimura and how high percentage is the Kimura. It's which versions of the Kimura allow you to create rotation, extension, and compression in the easiest manner possible, and then which versions of the Kimura allow you to apply some of the concepts we're going to talk about later on in the series. The more of these you apply, I would argue the more high percentage, and I think you'll see these. You'll see
the more guns you're bringing to the knife fight.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we're like the whole thrust of this series is how can we maximize our efficiency, get the quickest, easiest finish against the highest number of people, highest number of training partners, greatest variety of body types, etc., and we just want to stack the deck as much in our favor. So some versions of the Kimura will use just rotation, and they'll work on some people sometimes. Others will use extension and rotation, they'll work on more, etc., You can extrapolate out to the more of this you bring to the table, the greater number of people you'll be able to submit, regardless of their skill, size, strength, and also flexibility. One of the biggest things that I find a lot of people, again, we get a lot of visitors to our academy, and one of the biggest problems they have is with what we would generally refer to as braking mechanics, which is like, oh, I got this one flexible guy at my academy, and I put him in this or I put him in that, and he can just eat it. And some of them even complain about their training partner's stubbornness and stupidity. Like, I got this one guy who just refuses to tap. He's flexible, and he doesn't like to tap, and da-da-da-da. So, like, he's a bad training partner. Like, no, man, he's a good training partner for you in that he's illustrating that your braking mechanics are not on point. You've learned how to do the Kimura with just rotation, and against someone who's very flexible, that's often not enough. You see guys like here, and they're just eating it. That's partially because they're somewhat flexible, but it's partially because you're not applying all three of those things, and you're certainly not applying some of the other things that we're going to add later on. So hopefully that clarifies again for people why sometimes a submission that is cosmetically, like it's a Kimura, and I'm twisting and it should work, but because we're not applying all these, I don't want to say extra elements, I would say they're necessary if we want high level success. So if we're not applying these necessary elements, then it's not working, and now you know why. All right, now we're going to discuss extension. So we're going to use the armbar from the mount as our example. Again, there's kind of two ways we can go about it. The sort of classic, I call it the CPR armbar, where you press off the chest, rotate and go to this, or you can go to S mount, but it doesn't matter how we got here. The point is I'll be sitting down and I'll be controlling usually the wrist. Some people are at the elbow. There's different grips, but essentially I'm pulling on the end of the lever here, taking your arm into extension while I bridge, and I get a tap. So that's purely the extension. Again, how you got there really matters less than just understanding that. Now, if we want to add compression, rotation, and extension, we're going to go, we've got the extension already. We talked about base, posture, structure, things like that. So I want to break Stefan's posture here by curling my heel against his head, and I'm going to create some compression by taking my right thigh and pressing it down against his shoulder. This is going to create a fairly strong wedge, and it's going to limit the movement in his shoulder. Right? When I bridge here, if I take my leg away, see how his shoulder can move, right? Anytime the shoulder moves, it's absorbing some of the force I'm generating. So I'm going to compress the shoulder, and now rather than staying here, because here Stefan's in like a bicep curl or bench press alignment, so this is about as strong as his arm can get. But if I add some rotation to this, right, so if I go here, and I'll just use one arm, we'll go one arm against one, we'll arm wrestle. So start to curl. Stefan's a bit stronger than me, so he's already able to extend my arm. Now let me take you into rotation. Now start to curl.
Nobody curls like this.
Exactly. If we start here, start to curl.
Yeah.
I still got you, right? So by adding that rotation, we're taking away some of the strength in Stefan's arm. So extension here, rotation here, and compression at the shoulder. And now the amount of movement that I need is relatively minimal. There are other aspects to this that we will add later on. So in the next video, we're going to be talking about creating full tension and removing the slack. Right, so we may revisit the armbar, we may just give you different examples of it, but essentially again, we've taken a simple extension-based submission, showing you how, yeah, it works. And like, the armbar is one of the highest percentage submissions out there. But by adding those other two elements of rotation and compression, we can start to eliminate some of the potential avenues where force will bleed out and allow you to be more efficient with your finishes. So this is my favorite example. This is my go-to example. I've actually taught leg lock seminars where I use this as the example, and I've had people come to me, at tournaments months later and be like, hey, I was at your leg lock seminar, it really helped my game. I'm like, oh cool, you're getting more leg locks? Like, no, not really, but that armbar thing that you showed at the beginning, my armbar percentage has gone through the roof. So like, depending on your game, obviously some people are less likely to be able to practice leg locks and things like that at their academy, rules reasons, training, whatever. But understanding this like extension, compression, rotation thing, it's been super helpful. And it's not just people at seminars. I've been very fortunate to train with some pretty high level people, and like I was really excited. Maybe about a year ago, Yuri Samoa's had an instructional on no-gi takedowns, which you should totally get. It's awesome. And he gave me a shout out in it because we had talked about this in training when I was actually showing
part of his training camp.
Part of his training camp for ADCC, and we were going through some leg lock stuff. Like that was my role there, was to like help prepare him for some of the leg lock stuff that he'd be facing, and for him to execute it. And we were talking about braking mechanics and this idea of creating extension, and what we'll talk about more in the next video, which is taking the slack out of the joint by pulling on the arm. And that was something he mentioned as his instructional. And he gave like the coolest Brazilian mispronunciation of my last name. So Robert Biernacki. This is how he pronounced it. So one of the highlights of my career is having, getting a shout out from an ADCC champ with some of this conceptual material that I've put out. So that's, like I said, the armbar is one of my favorite examples, and that's one of the many reasons why. All right, the next example we're going to give is compression. So compression-based submission would be a bicep slicer. So commonly, I think probably one of the most common application of this is where you've got the armbar and then you bring your leg across here like so, and you triangle it and you're grabbing your thigh. Sorry, let me not step on your face while we do this. So I'm using my forearm in this case to create, well, essentially a wedge, but it's also going to create a fulcrum over which I'm trying to break something. As I compress my knee, or my calf, sorry, it starts to activate the lever, like the forearm to here, and the amount of force that's generated starts to crush the biceps. And the potential injury here is like a biceps tendon detachment. So like I've actually seen people's bicep roll up into their shoulder from this. This is
or snap forearm bone.
Or snap forearm bone is another potential one. And in my experience, the more like muscular someone is, the more vulnerable they are to this. I'm one of these guys who rarely, if ever, has had to tap to any kind of slicer, calf or bicep slicer, because I'm a spindly, lanky fuck, and it's like you can compress my arm all the way, and it's difficult to get me to tap. But that's so that now I'm just applying compression, and I was almost at the end of my range of motion. If you hadn't tapped there, I may have given up, right?
If I hadn't been as much of a pussy.
Yeah, exactly. So now I'm going to start to apply a little bit of extension and a little bit of rotation. So I'll be dragging my hip away, and you can see already that adding to the pressure. So I'm pulling almost like I would to finish an armbar. I can even add like a grip here. So as I start to pull and compress, it's already worse. And now if I start to fall to my side and add the rotation aspect where I'm pushing down here while moving this up, compression is happening here and extension is happening here. So again, adding all three allows for a lot more felt pain on your part and a lot less physical effort on my part to get to the point of tap where I've got so much range of motion left that I can still create an injury, whereas before I'm relying on you most likely to just be like, man, I just don't want my arm to be sore for the next few days, I gotta go to work. And that's it again, when we talk about submissions in training versus submissions in competition versus submissions in high level competition, that's again the distinguishing factor is how much damage can I cause? In training, unless you're dealing with a little bit of a dummy or somebody who's just very young and recovers quickly, etc., people will tap to just about anything that hurts a fair bit. In competition, people will tap very rarely to something that just hurts. And in high-level competition, people will tap never to something that just hurts. You have to create the potential of catastrophic injury. So in the gym, the guy's got to feel like, oh, maybe this could pop my arm, I'll tap. In regular competitions, like, ooh, I felt a pop, I should tap. In high-level competitions, pop, 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 crack, all right, I guess you got, like, you'd be surprised how often people are walking out of a tournament, even one that they won, with some torn ligaments, some damage. Anytime you see someone escape a submission in high level competition, there was damage done. There's no such thing usually as, oh, you got me an armbar and I just got out. It's like click, click, pop. Ah, okay, there we go. That created enough slack, again, a concept we'll talk about later, that allows you to get out. So our ability to create catastrophic damage with the submission is what determines whether it's successful or not.
Before we go here,
Yeah.
how much of the extension, rotation, and compression can you apply, say, doing the bicep slicer from spider guard? You know, the classic where you let the guy pass.
Oh yeah. We're talking like lasso style, going from here and then getting to this. Yeah. So the compression I've got. Extension is a little bit more difficult. If I want to add the extension, I'll be pulling my forearm against the inside of like your lat and your rib cage. And then as far as like rotation's kind of tricky because I need to get and I can actually do this just by planting my foot this way, but I'd have to really turn this way and my elbow would have to be blocking your wrist to add to that. So this is where I'd be going, as opposed to just staying here and trying to lift so you can see here.
It hurts.
It hurts a little bit, and it just goes back to that initial concept of base, posture, and structure. Right now, my base is kind of shitty. Now it's better. I've got my foot, it's infinitely better. And then, we add that whole extension, rotation, compression thing, all the lever type stuff. All right? So moving this way, and then extending allows me to apply it. So, again,
It's not as clear an example, but you are applying those elements.
Applying those elements and making what I would normally argue as not a particularly effective submission. We can at least take it from this will rarely work to hey, this will work sometimes. Right? I use the bicep slicer as an example just because we need an example of compression. I tend to view compression only based locks as being the lowest percentage of the three. The extension and rotation ones are much more applicable because there's less of a body type issue. Like really tall, lanky, flexible people tend to be very difficult to finish with slicers, whereas there isn't a body type that's just hard to finish with the other ones. If your mechanics are on point with extension, rotation, you'll break people. If somebody's got a body type flexibility thing, it's the compression based ones that tend to suffer. So I don't use them very much, but we need an example of it, and even that illustrates just how much of a difference there is between just the compression part and the compression, extension, and rotation. So it's still a good example.